Hey everybody, Ed Homewood. So this video should be interesting, possibly a bit controversial. I've got a feeling that there's going to be a subset of audiophiles out there that are going to get upset because I don't do measurements and I don't care about measurements, not even a little bit. And we're going to talk about something, I guess, that's controversial. I don't know how it is. I hear the benefits of it. We're going to talk about DDCs and reclockers. And part of that conversation is I'm going to talk about XMOS chips. You hear me talk about that often in DACs and in DDCs when I mention those, and what an XMOS chip actually does. We're going to talk about FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays, but because they are such a versatile device, we're going to talk about FPGAs in relationship to what they can do within a DDC reclocker circuit. So then we're going to kind of summarize, and I'm going to talk about the various DDCs all the way from the $1,000 LAIV micro DDC all the way down to the little SMSL PL100, just standard edition for 39 bucks. Anyway, so we'll get going on that in just a second. If you enjoy the video, I would greatly appreciate you giving me a like and a subscribe. So a DDC reclocker. DDC stands for digital to digital converter. We'll talk about all of that in just a second. The DDC reclocker sits between your source component and your DAC. So if your source is a computer, Mac or PC, a streamer, or a CD transport, it sits before the DAC. So the signal from those devices go into the DDC reclocker and then out to your DAC. Now, on paper, and according to all of the measurements crowd, all it does is move digital bits around and has no benefit. Well, I'm sorry, that's wrong. In practice, it has real benefits, and let's talk about those real quick. Well, digital audio isn't just ones and zeros, despite what everybody wants to tell you. It's about when those bits arrive at the DAC chip. So jitter and timing errors are the same thing. A reclocker strips away the source component's clock signal. It retimes it through usually a much better clock device, oscillator clock, much cleaner, much more stable, and then it hands that signal off to your DAC. Now, another big benefit of DDC reclockers is noise isolation. So computers, TVs, streamers, CD players dump a lot of electrical noise into their USB signals or their coax outputs, and a good DDC reclocker galvanically isolates that source component from the DAC. That breaks ground loops, reduces high frequency noise that can leak into the DAC's analog stage and cloud the music. It doesn't give us the resolution that we're looking for. Another great one is format conversion. Many DDCs allow you to change from USB to either coax, SPDIF toslink, AES-EBU, or even I2S. Now this is really handy if your DAC sounds best with a certain input, or if your source doesn't natively support the format you want. Or give you for instance, I have a lot of viewers that own just Shelly DACs, and maybe you bought a J2 DAC a couple of years ago and you didn't opt for the USB. Well, what do? Well, with a DDC reclocker, and even an inexpensive one, you can convert that USB signal into a SPDIF, toslink, or coax signal and go into your J2 that way. And we're retiming, we're galvanically isolating, we do all those things that we want, and that DAC will sound a lot better. Now, another benefit, and this is one that I enjoy, signal integrity over a distance. So I have my Artivana servers up in the rack, and I run about a 12-foot USB cable down to the DACs and the equipment you'll see under the TV when I'm doing reviews. So I run that USB cable, and before I put it into a DAC, I run it into a DDC reclocker so that it reduces noise, it reduces dropouts, and it allows me then to convert that USB into really kind of any output I want to. So why it matters even when you have asynchronous USB in your DAC. And you might wonder that. Well, shouldn't that already fix the jitter? Yeah, asynchronous USB means that the DAC uses its own clock, not the computer's, but USB still is electrically noisy as all get out. And a DAC's internal clock recovery isn't always perfect. A good external reclocker gives that DAC a cleaner starting point, so the DAC's job is much easier. So when a DDC reclocker helps most? A noisy source, PC, a gaming console, a cheap streamer, feeding a high-end DAC that's super revealing of input quality. Again, like I mentioned, long USB cable runs. DACs that have better SPDIF, AES-EBU, or I2 inputs, better sounding inputs than USB. Now, there are some significant sonic performance benefits, and this is obviously a perception, and this is, I can only go based on my opinion. What I hear from a lot of folks that have implemented DDC reclockers is much lower noise floor, and that is a big one for me, having an absolutely inky black background for the music. That's where all of the detail and everything becomes revealed. So a blacker background, the music feels like it kind of emerges from silence, right? Improved imaging, obviously revealing those small details, that room sound, the reverberation off the walls of a concert hall, whatever, allows me to have a bigger sound stage, but also it can give me better instrument places within that sound stage. So imaging wise, a lot better. Better rhythm and timing. The bass feels tighter. There's no question. That's a big benefit, one I noticed. The bass feels tighter, attacks are sharper, transients are better reproduced. It's much smoother treble. That's another thing. Less glare, less of that digital hash. You know, you talk about a lot of devices having, you know, DACs. Sometimes some DACs can have a harsh sound. Will the DDC correct that? No, but it'll help clean up the signal going in, so it's a little less harsh, I find. I also find that with the DDC Reclocker in the system, I get a much more natural flow. I would describe it as the music sounding less digital, less computery, you know, almost more like what we would expect from a dedicated CD transport, although CD transports can benefit from a DDC reclocker. So the bottom line on DDC reclockers is it doesn't add detail, it doesn't change the bits, but it cleans up the digital signal before it hits the DAC. I've used the analogy before. We all rinse our dishes before we put them in the dishwasher. That way the dishwasher doesn't have to work so hard to get them clean. I think the benefit for me is heard in tighter timing, lower noise, and a much more relaxed and natural presentation. Now, you know me, I'm Mr. Smooth and Warm. So XMOS chips. XMOS is actually a brand. It's not a type of chip. I don't know what XMOS stands for, but XMOS enumerates their different DAC chips with the prefix XU. So back in the day, we had the XU-208, the XU-216, the XU-316. There is, obviously there's more power in the newer models, but if a DDC reclocker or even a DAC has an old XU-216, that was a great chip. That's not a detriment. That's not a knock against it. It's still a high performance chip. So what is XMOS chips? What do? Well, they're not part of the DAC itself. They don't do any digital analog conversion. What it does is handle the digital input side from USB. It's kind of the traffic cop for USB in a DAC or in a reclocker. So when you hook your reclocker or your DAC up to a computer or streamer by USB, XMOS chips, that's what talks to that source component. It makes sure the music data gets transferred smoothly and in sync with the reclocker's clock, or if we're not using a reclocker, in sync with the DAC's clock. Without an XMOS chip, it'd be noisy as all get out. Now there are some other options, and we'll talk about what are some of the other options that for DACs that don't use XMOS, but we'll talk about that. So asynchronous USB. Asynchronous means that the XMOS chip communicates with the source and it can ask for a resend. So if it detects a packet, that data, those ones and zeros, are sent in packets. If it detects a corrupted packet, it can ask the device, the sending device, to resend that packet to do the error correction. So it's bi-directional. The idea is then it takes the timing, really kind of strips the timing off of that incoming signal and allows the DAC's clock to do the timing, or in the case of reclockers, a much more accurate, typically much more accurate clock signal. The XMOS chip in a reclocker takes that USB signal in, runs it through the reclocker's clock, and you get a much more stable, much more accurate signal going out to the DAC. Format handling. XMOS chips can handle PCM, and it can handle anything from 1644 all the way to 32768 and sometimes higher, even though there's nothing up that high. I mean, once we get to 24192, there's not really anything beyond that. It can also handle DSD. It can also handle DSD over DOP, and it depends on the DAC design. And guess what? Sometimes it can do MQA. That'll make 3 or 4 of you really happy. Anyway, programmability. An XMOS chip is programmable by the reclocker or the DAC's designer to have certain functions. You know, native DSD playback, maybe multi-channel audio. That's becoming a big thing these days. Sometimes special filtering operations. So as I mentioned, the XMOS chip really is kind of the traffic cop inside the reclocker or your DAC. It doesn't shape the sound directly, but it makes sure that the digital audio data gets to the DAC clean, stable and in the right format and properly timed. So for products that don't use XMOS chips, and again, there's a lot of DACs that do, almost all the DDC reclockers I'm familiar with do, or they use an FPGA. But if you're not using a XMOS for USB handling, there is a couple of options. One is the Amonero Combo 384 chip. Now, this is the chip that Gino Gischelli uses in his DACs, and he designs and builds and manufactures his entire USB system, his input system, based around that chip, but it's his own design. Now, it's quite good. I have a couple of DACs that have the Amonero board, and it works really well. Now, will it benefit from a reclocker? Yeah, I think so. But anyway, the Amonero was really popular back before XMOS really gained a lot of traction, and it was one of the big selling points was it did DSD natively, but it's kind of a fixed design. It can't be field updated. So some DACs with XMOS processors you'll see have a little micro SD card slot or a USB input for updates. If it has just an XMOS, you're probably updating the XMOS. If it has an XMOS and an FPGA, you could be updating both. If it has just an FPGA, you could be updating just that. Amoneros can't be updated once they're installed in the system. Now, for a less expensive alternative, and you'll see this in Bluetooth speakers and cheap stuff, cell phones especially, it's called C-Media, and it's a CM6631 or 6631A chip. Really budget. If you ever seen the little on Amazon, a little $20 DAC, that's what's in those things. They get the job done. They don't support high resolution, 24, maybe 2496, 24192, rarely. DSD64. They're cheap. They don't have any features, but you know, for an inexpensive device, cell phone DAC, Bluetooth DAC, those kinds of things, it works really well. Now, there are some custom options that manufacturers like DCS, Cord, RME, some of the really high-end brands, maybe Mola, Shit definitely does it. They use their own USB design. Now, in the case of Shit, it's called Unison USB. And one of the things, hats off to the guys at Shit, Jason and Mike Moffitt, is they've democratized that Unison USB. You'll find it even in some of their less expensive DACs, not just the high-end stuff. And again, it just allows them to control every part of the process for handling USB. Do those DACs that use that kind of a device benefit from a reclocker? They do. I have a couple of Shit DACs. Yeah, they do, without question. Now, there can be some confusion. Sometimes TI gets mixed into this. TI does make some chips that sometimes get mixed up with USB handling. It's called a USB PHY transceiver. Now, TI makes parts that handle the physical layer of USB signaling, the electrical side of getting data on and off the cable, but that's not the same as being a USB audio interface. Sometimes there are DSP chips like the TAS series, the TMS 320 and other chips like that can process audio and even handle I2S from a USB bridge, but they need a separate USB controller in front of them. How about a DAC plus USB combo chips? Yes, there's some DACs that TI makes that is kind of it's a one-chip USB DAC and all-in-one solution, and it has the USB input and analog output stage built in. They're typically not as well executed or as good sounding as dedicated, a separate XMOS or USB handling, and then a separate DAC chip. So how do all of these different inputs compare in practice? Well, C-Media, it's basic, it's cheap, it works, it sounds fine, it's limited. On a Bluetooth speaker, your cell phone, you're never going to know the difference. Amonero is a little bit older, but I think still a really good solution. Great sound, a little less flexible. XMOS is the current go-to for almost everybody. It's powerful, it's flexible, it supports all modern formats. They can make it do what they want to do. I think it really is a really good solution. At the end of the day, the USB interface matters a lot. It's a critical piece in the chain. In addition to a really well-designed power supply, really good clocking, and a really good DAC stage, it can have a positive impact on sound. And it really doesn't matter, honestly, if it's between XMOS and Amonero, if it's built into your DAC. XMOS definitely on the DDC Reclockers. So now, that's a lot of techie stuff, and I apologize, I am a nerd. Let's talk about FPGAs. Oh joy, Well, FPGA stands for Field Programmable Gate Array, and it's a programmable logic block, and it is oftentimes, if it's in a DAC or in a DDC reclocker, it is kind of the brains of the operation. So FPGA, in that role as kind of the commander of what's going on, it handles clock management and reclocking. It generates or resynchronizes a very low jitter master clock, oftentimes in association or in conjunction with external clocking chips or oscillators. It buffers the incoming audio stream, reclocks it against its own clean, internally controlled clock, and that could be an external silicon clock chip, before it sends it down to, downstream to the DAC for decoding. It reduces those timing errors and jitter that can blur transients and soften dynamics. Again, very similar to what an XMOS does, but the FPGA does it on any of the inputs. SPDIF, USB, doesn't matter. It handles protocol conversion and all that other stuff. So if your input is SPDIF, AES, EBU, Toslink, coax, I2S sometimes, it converts them into a common internal language, and that's typically I2S is how the DAC communicates internally. It routes the stream out in whatever format the DAC prefers. Again, most often I2S, sometimes LVDS, sometimes HDMI, or sometimes SPDIF, depending on the DAC and the age of it and the type of DAC it is. Unlike a fixed program or fixed function chip, FPGAs can be reprogrammed to support newer formats or tweak data handling. A lot of times on, the more premium stuff that uses FPGA, you'll see a USB input for either a little card or a USB signal, to upload a new format, new programming. The FPGA also handles error correction and signal conditioning, so it applies buffering, error detection, sometimes redundancy checks, CIRC redundancy error conversion, just to ensure that the bit stream is transmitted without any dropouts or corruption. It cleans up noisy input signals before handing them off to the DAC. So here we have in front of, and I'll actually talk about what happens when we have the FPGA and XMOS in the same system. We'll talk about that. And again, it's the oversight of the data flow. It maintains precise synchronization between the data and clock lines, especially important for I2S over HDMI, where that alignment of those signals is important. It can implement advanced routines like FIFO, first in, first out buffering, memory buffering, or decouple the source clock from the output clock. Now, some of these DDC reclockers actually have a master clock internally that you can output to a device that will accept that. We'll talk about that when I talk about the individual devices. So again, why use an FPGA rather than a fixed chip? Well, again, it's the upgradability of it. It's the fact that the designer can put whatever program they want in that FPGA to get the result they're looking for, which I think gives each manufacturer and each designer of these devices the ability to voice it kind of the way they want to. It can implement, the FPGA can implement a bespoke program, either for that model or for that brand. And you kind of get that house sound then. And again, FPGAs are far more customizable than just buying an off-the-shelf chip. You're stuck with whatever that TI or whoever it was wants to do. And it's kind of future-proofing again because of the updating. So let's talk about how an FPGA and an XMOS processor work together in the same device. Well, before we talk about how the two can work together, an FPGA and an XMOS, let's talk a little bit about their differing roles and how that compares to one another. So in an FPGA, in a DDC that uses, or a DAC that uses an FPGA, it is the traffic cop. It is the clock maker. It takes that messy incoming digital signal, it cleans it, it retimes it, and it provides a super stable clock timing signal. And again, more often than not, it's using external clock oscillators to do that timing, not necessarily doing it itself, although you can program it to do that, but using external clock oscillators, oscillator chips, is a far more accurate way of doing it, and it sends that cleaned up signal out exactly in the format your DAC wants to see it. In the case of a ladder DAC, it's going to be PCM. In the case of a Delta Sigma DAC, it could be PCM, could be DSD, could be WAVE, it could be a bunch of different things. So let's compare kind of the FPGA approach to the much more common XMOS approach. So the FPGA, again, custom logic, reclocking, multi-format handling, its flexibility, the flexibility of an FPGA chip is immense. It can be programmed to handle almost any input-output scheme, USB, I2S, SPDIF, AES, whatever. Clocking, it integrates FIFO buffers internally. It can work with external clock chips, so again, you get true, accurate reclocking. It can be customized. The manufacturer can program it to do things they want. It tends to prioritize ultra-low jitter, clock isolation, and signal integrity. Now, FPGAs are more expensive without question, and they're a little bit more difficult to implement, which is why you'll see XMOS a lot. But when you get into the higher end, you'll see both XMOS and FPGA. So again, XMOS is USB focused. That's what it does. It handles that asynchronous conversation between the USB output of your device and the USB input of the DDC Reclocker or DAC. Now, there are some, and XMOS chips can be used, for those of you who game, we know that there is UAC2 and UAC3 now for USB communications, and sometimes just a straight up USB doesn't talk properly to your gaming console. XMOS is plug and play. It handles all the driver negotiation, packet timing, and standard, PCM, DSD, audio transfer, and it can do some reclocking in that it strips away the incoming clock signal and allows the DACs clock to take over and retime everything. So it actually doesn't necessarily retime, but it buffers that asynchronous data signal so that the clock can, the accurate clock signal from the internal clock on the DAC can be applied to it. So let's talk about how the two of those work together. So you can think of this in this way. Each one has its own job. XMOS only solutions just do USB. FPGA and DDC reclockers go beyond USB, but what you have is, if you've got an XMOS on the incoming USB signal, right, what you're handing off to the FPGA, if it has an FPGA in conjunction with XMOS, is a super clean, really well-treated data signal. Again, it's not just ones and zeros, it's the timing of those ones and zeros. And honestly, people are going to go, well, I already have this, I already have that, why doesn't it do it all by itself? Well, it can, and if you're happy with the way it sounds, I guess that's fine. All that really matters is what you think, not what I think. But for me, when I have, and I've got DDC reclockers that use both XMOS and FPGA to clean up that signal, getting the USB signal clean, retimed, and buffered properly to go into the FPGA, which is kind of like the master clock, it's like the CPU sort of thing. And again, you'll see Altera, Intel Altera ARM processors and FPGA chips, you'll see ARM processors, you'll see kind of traditional CPUs. All of them do similar sorts of things, but the most common one is the FPGA, and I think the best one is the Intel Altera, I think whatever 4 or 5 generation right now is really powerful and does a great job. So the FPGA is the master. It is what's determining everything for that ones and zeros signal before it ever gets to your DAC, and it makes a huge difference in performance. I hear it. I think you'll hear it. I know a lot of people that have commented when I've talked about DDC reclockers or really good DACs that use FPGAs. They talk about the quality of the signal they're getting. So now let's talk about the individual DDC reclockers that I've got here. So DDC reclockers, as I talked about in the beginning of the video, I've got a bunch of different ones, and we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive now on them here. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the SMSL P0100 2024 version. You can get these on Amazon for $39. This is a wonderful little device. It does reclocking and everything else. It's got an XMOS processor in it. It uses the latest XU316. It is fundamentally a USB to SPDIF converter. So how would you use this? Well, a couple of different ways. My Advanced Paris A12 Classic and a lot of the integrateds or preamps that I get in that have built-in DACs, sometimes they lack a USB input. So I run everything off of Artivana, and I like to use the USB output, and I've got as many USB outputs off of that as I want. So I run into this USB and I convert it to Toslink or coax, and then I can run it into the A12 Classic. I can run it into the preamp that doesn't have a USB in. I can run it into, let's say you have an old Shelly J2 DAC that you didn't opt for the USB board on. Well, that USB board costs $50, and this is only $39. So if you wanted to get a new J2S and skip the USB, you could use this and just run USB into this, and then your SPDIF out into the J2, and it works really well. I use it all the time, again, on my A12 Classic. So that's the PO100. Now, a little step up from that is the PO100 Pro. I think this is about 75 bucks on Amazon. Now, this one will support 24-bit 192 because it's just SPDIF, and that's all SPDIF is. That's the maximum you're going to get out of SPDIF most of the time. Now, the PO100 Pro will do 32-bit 768 because it will take a USB in and convert it to I2S on HDMI out, as well as the Toslink and coax SPDIF outputs. This also uses an XMOS XU316, and this also handles DSD natively. So it supports, like I said, the I2S out to 32/768. I've used this lots in very expensive DACs, and it works quite well. I think it works quite well. So that's the SMSL units, the PO100 and the PO100 Pro. Now, another really fun unit that I've found is, and this is, don't get confused because they named it badly. This is the Duke Audio U2 Pro 2025 version. You can tell just cosmetically this between the older version. The older version also really required a 5-volt power supply. This doesn't. This will operate off the 5 volts on the USB. Now, this will also do 32-bit 768 native DSD. It also has an XU316 chip in it, but it has a separate oscillator clock. And then a little bit later, I'm going to open this up real quick, show you the inside of a couple of these units. But this one's really nice. These are about 70 bucks, but don't confuse it with the previous version. So again, there's a good look at it. That's the newest version. The older version worked okay, but I found it to be clunky and kind of inconsistent in its operation. So let's move to a little bit more upscale unit. Now, the next one is the Matrix X-SPDIF 3. There's really not much to see on the front. There's a little LED. I own this one. I actually bought this one. It's a really nice piece. And this has USB in, and it can output on AES-EBU, coax, Toslink, and I2S. Now, it does require a 12-volt power supply, and I use a relatively inexpensive 12-volt power supply I got on AliExpress for maybe 75, 80 bucks. This sells for $499. Now, this will do on I2S, it'll do 32-bit 768 and DSD 512 native. On SPDIF, again, SPDIF is limited to 24/192 and typically DSD over DOP. Now, this has 2 built-in femtosecond oscillator clocks, so it's not just relying on the XMOS processor internally, it's relying on those external clocks. And I don't know if this has an FPGA. If it does, I'll put it down here. I've never opened it up, but you'll see the inside in a little bit. And this can it takes a USB input, but it's USB on type B rather than on C like the smaller units have. Really, really nice. And again, this can output on AES-EBU. So the next one is the Singxer SU-2, and this is about 480 bucks. This one I purchased myself. I've not done a review on it. I will, but I was very impressed with its performance and I bought it myself. So this can be used as, what's really cool, it can be used as an independent master clock. It has its own internal clock, and with certain DACs, you can choose to use their internal clock or the external clock over I2S. But this one also, if you have a clock input, I can master clock it here, or I can take the input from a master clock. That really makes a big difference. So the master clock itself can support 44.1 at 384 or 22.5 or 49.152 or 10 megahertz. Now this will do obviously I2S at 32/768, SPDIF at 24/192. Now this uses an ARM Cortex processor. It's an FPGA that controls all the USB data. It uses 2 AccuSilicon AS318 femtosecond clock oscillators, 150 megabits per second full isolation chip for galvanic and electronic isolation, and source synchronization with the FPGA programming technology to reshape and isolate the I2S signal, eliminating additive jitter caused by the galvanic isolation chip. This thing is very sophisticated, and I found it to perform extraordinarily well. I did do a review of the Gustard, I think it was the U218 or XU218 isolator, and that worked really good. I think this sounds better. I also think for the money, honestly, it sounds better than the Matrix X-SPDIF. So let's talk about the last one of these DDCs that I've got in-house right now. As I mentioned when I was talking about the Singxer, I did do the Gustard U18, which does do all of the similar things. It does have the Accusilicon femtosecond low phase noise clocks in it and complete galvanic isolation. That was a really good piece at $500. I just think the Singxer at $470 is a little bit better product. Sonically, I think they're very close. I'd give the edge to the Singxer a little bit. So let's talk about the last one, and it's the LAIV DDC, the micro DDC. This is a unique device. All of these other devices we've seen, except for one, which I'll talk about last, all of them only take a USB input. Now, the LAIV will actually take not only USB, it'll take I2S in, it'll take AES-EBU, it will take SPDIF on coax. So it takes a number of different inputs and it converts them all to I2S only. That's the only output is I2S. So this is a very specialized unit. Now these run about $1,000 and it is amazing. It will handle anything you want. So it will take your USB input and give you 32,768, actually probably higher than that, and DSD-512, I think even DSD-1024. But it will take your SPDIF inputs and convert them to I2S. So if you want to run, and you've got a high-end, and you want to do a high-end system, you got a high-end DAC like a Live Harmony DAC, and you want to run your CD transport into this, you can via coax. You want to run your streamer that may not via USB into this, your PC server, Roon, whatever, USB into this and then out to your DAC. But kind of, again, specialized since it's only I2S output. So let's talk about this other cool piece I found from Wired for Sound. Well, I forgot to mention, I did a full review of the LAIV micro DDC. So the Wired for Sound Remedy Reclocker. This now at $300, $399, $400. This isn't cheap, but this thing can be a really cool addition to your system. So what it does is it only takes SPDIF input, so Toslink or coax. It doesn't handle USB or I2S or any of that other stuff. So let's say you've got a really nice high-end vintage CD transport, CD player, whatever, or you have a very inexpensive CD transport and you want to run it into a really good quality DAC. Well, this allows you to do that. You can take the optical or coax output from that CD transport or that device that only has optical or coax, or your streamer that may not have a USB out, and you can run it into this and it reclocks it. Now, what it does is it uses a femto-grade clock. It offers great jitter reduction, because again, there's jitter on SPDIF. It uses a 96 kilohertz output sampling frequency. So no, it's not 32,384 or 32,768, but SPDIF can't do that anyway. The maximum you'll get on SPDIF is 24,192. So even 24,96 is just fine. I promise you won't hear the difference. It does take Toslink or coax in. It will output on Toslink or coax, and it does have on this particular one, and I have to look real quick to see what it is because I don't have my strong glasses on. On the output, it does have a coax on BNC. No one's ever going to use that really. So you can input 24,192 and it'll convert all of those connections. Now, you could come in coax and go out optical if you want to. So it does do a format conversion. And it does require a 9-volt power supply, but it's supplied with the unit. This thing is fascinating. Again, I think this offers a lot of flexibility to many of us who maybe bought a really nice mid-price streamer, but it doesn't have a USB output, but we want to run it into a really nice DAC, but we want to take advantage of the reclocking, the jitter reduction, and everything else that a DDC reclocker can do. This can do that, and you can add it to your vintage device. You can add it to your, again, your mid-price streamer that doesn't have a USB output. I think the Remedy Reclocker is a really neat device overall. So the summary, finally, we're going to get through this crazy long video. I apologize, and I appreciate your guys' patience on this, and hopefully you're learning something, and hopefully in the comments you'll let me know if you did. I know I'm going to get a lot of comments with all, this is all snake oil and BS and all that other stuff, and you know what, you can believe what you want to believe. I never said and if this was other than my opinion. I do know what these devices can do, we can prove that. But the sonic benefits, again, it can only be what I hear. And I think I got a pretty good ear. Anyway, hopefully. So the summary is, no matter what device you have, a CD player, whether it's like the little SMSL PL200T, that's a cool piece. Take that output and run it into a DDC. Now with the Singxer, I take the clock output from this and run it to the clock input on the SMSL PL200 T transport and let this reclock that data signal from the CD player, and then I run it into this for conversion to I2S. That's kind of cool. So these devices will absolutely help eliminate jitter to the point where it is really kind of a non-issue. Your signal will be clean, the fine detail will be resolved, your noise floor will be the lowest you've ever heard it, the background will be black, all of that really super fine detail that's in those digital signals will be revealed. Now, a lot will depend on the DAC you plug them into. I mean, if you're plugging all this stuff into a $250 DAC, I don't know. If you're using one of the kind of the more inexpensive units and you're going into your $250 DAC, yeah, you're gonna hear a difference, no question. And I think it'll clean it up, and I think you'll hear a better image, better transients. It'll sound more dynamic. It'll just reveal more detail to you. So I am a big advocate of DDC Reclockers at any price level, literally from $39 on up. And I've got some more expensive stuff coming in that I'm testing. But again, I believe in it enough that I spent my own money and bought the Matrix, and I spent my own money and I bought the Singxer SU-2 unit, and I use it all the time. These are always in the system somewhere. This is always with the LAIV micro DAC. These are always in the desktop system with whatever little DAC I'm testing. This I'm using on my Advanced Paris A12 Classics DAC. This I use on the desktop, or I use this with a CD transport. You know, that's kind of interesting because I do have CD transports that output on USB. I use this with my vintage CD stuff. Really nice. So all of these have, in my opinion, have a very real benefit on what you're going to hear. Without question. I just think they make such a big difference in imaging, in transients, in dynamics, in just the revealing of subtle and super fine detail that really, I think, for me as an audiophile, I hate that word. As a hi-fi enthusiast, let's call it that. As a hi-fi enthusiast, I'm always looking for that last measure of detail, that last measure of soundstage and imaging. And one of these will help move that ball forward for you an awful lot, I think, for sure. So anyway, DDC Reclockers. That's my take on them. Thank you for sticking with me on this one. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you'd be willing to give me a like and your subscription. Your subscription does count a lot, and I do appreciate that, as does your review. Please consider giving me a like. Please consider subscribing. Please consider hitting the bell notification so you'll know when I drop another video. I'd like to take a moment, as I always do, to thank my channel members and my subscribers. Guys, you have been so supportive of me. Thank you very much. There will be in the pinned comment and video description, a link to channel membership if you're so inclined. There will also be, if you're watching on your device or computer, down in the lower right-hand corner of the video window is a thank you button. If you want to support the channel that way, it would be great. There's no music in this one. I did do a DDC Reclocker playlist already, so I will include that link in the video description. There are some affiliate links. I'm trying to pare those down a little bit just to make them more relevant. I'll put links to each one of these devices so that you can find them easily. Please check out the community post playlist. My goodness, there is a ton of stuff. And thank you guys. Thank you to everyone who's contributed a playlist to that. It's growing really beautiful. And man, you guys have some great taste in music. Comment. Let me know what you think. I know I'm going to get a ton of hate on this one, and that's fine. The measurements crowd can do what they want to do. I use my ears to measure. I listen, and that's far more accurate than any measuring device. I don't care what you say. So comment. Let me know your thoughts. Man, did I go in depth on this one. I have covered everything, I truly believe. Yeah, I think so. Please consider liking. Please consider subscribing. Please comment. Follow me on Instagram if you want to. My name is Ed Homewood. This is the Old Guy Hi-Fi channel, and I really thank you so very much for your time. I really hope you have a wonderful day.